The morning Greer Callahan walked back into her coffee shop after dropping her daughter at school. She had no idea her ex-husband was standing at the counter, waiting for her like he owned the place. He looked the same. That was the worst part. Same lazy smile, same expensive haircut, same way of leaning against the counter like the world had been arranged specifically for his comfort. And standing next to him was his girlfriend, young, polished, wearing a ring that caught the light even in the dim warmth of the shop. Greer. He said her name like a greeting and a verdict at the same time. She kept walking, past the door, past the chalkboard menu she'd hand-lettered herself 3 years ago, past the memory of who she used to be when she was still his wife. She went straight behind the counter and started pulling shots. "We were in the neighborhood," Brett said. "Thought we'd stop in." His girlfriend, Kendall, Greer remembered from Instagram, not that she'd been looking, gave a tight little smile and pressed herself closer to Brett's arm. She was showing off the ring without technically showing it off. Greer had mastered that move herself once, a long time ago. "What can I get you?" Greer said. "Not a question." Brett laughed. He had this laugh that used to make her feel like the most charming person in the room. Now it sounded like a door closing. "Still serious as ever," he said to Kendall, like Greer wasn't standing right there. "She ran this little place while I was building the firm." Bless her heart. Bless her heart. 2 years of marriage, 1 daughter, 1 miscarriage he'd never acknowledged, 1 divorce he'd filed 3 weeks after she'd finally asked for an apology, and bless her heart was what he had. Greer set 2 cups on the counter, oat milk latte, and you always ordered a flat white with 1 sugar, Brett. "That's still accurate, or has something changed?" The girlfriend blinked. Brett's smile got smaller. Greer made the drinks in silence. The shop was quiet this early, just the hiss of steam, the grind of beans, the muffled street noise from outside. She had built every inch of this place after the divorce. Not with his money, not with his name on anything. With her hands and her savings and 6 months of barely sleeping, while her daughter Lena was at her parents' house on weekends so Greer could work the early shift and the closing shift and every single shift in between. She slid the cups across the counter. "She's cute," Kendall said suddenly, nodding toward the framed photo by the register. Lena, age 5, gap tooth, holding a cup of steamed milk Greer had topped with a little foam heart. "Your daughter?" "She is," Greer said. "Brett told me about her. It's so sweet that you're managing everything on your own." Kendall tilted her head, sincere, pitying. Greer had seen that look on 100 faces since the divorce, and she was so tired of it she could lie down on the floor and sleep for a year. It must be hard. Doing all this, she gestured vaguely around the shop while raising a kid solo. "We manage just fine," Greer said. Brett put his card on the counter. Greer didn't pick it up immediately. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time since he'd walked in, and she thought, "I don't feel anything," which was its own kind of gift. She'd spent 18 months waiting to feel nothing, and here it was, finally arrived, quiet and clean as a swept floor. "I heard you've been seeing someone," Brett said. Casual. Too casual. Word gets around. Does it? Some suit. "Someone's assistant mentioned seeing you at Rosewood last month." He paused. Seemed like a lot for a coffee shop. Rosewood was not a lot for a coffee shop. Rosewood was, in fact, the kind of place where you didn't look at the prices on the menu, because there were no prices on the menu, because the people who dined there didn't need to know. Greer had been there 4 times in the past 2 months. She didn't correct him. "You look good," Brett said finally, like it cost him something. "I'm glad things are working out for you." She handed him back his card. "Have a nice day." She called her best friend Dana from the back room during the mid-morning lull. He said, "Bless her heart," Greer said. "I will destroy him," Dana said immediately. "He brought her to my shop, Dana. My shop. The one he told me was a phase and that I'd be back to temping by Christmas. And instead, you own a shop in the DeSoto district that has a waitlist for weekend reservations. It's a coffee shop. We don't do reservation. And you're dating a man who looks like he walked out of a GQ spread and makes Brett look like a discount furniture catalog." Dana paused. "You are dating him, right? Like, officially?" Greer leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling. This was the complicated part. The part she'd been turning over in her mind for 2 months, pressing on like a bruise, trying to figure out what she actually felt. I don't know what we are, she said honestly. She'd met Stellan Voss at her daughter's pediatric hospital fundraiser, of all places. She'd gone to support a colleague. She'd been a nurse practitioner before Lena, before the divorce, before the shop, a life that felt like it belonged to a different woman. And he'd been there because the children's wing had a name on it that matched his. She hadn't known that until later. At the event, he'd just been the man standing alone by the windows, who had looked at the appetizers like they'd personally offended him, and she'd walked over and said, "They're not that bad." And he'd looked at her and said, "The salmon ones are catastrophically bad." And she'd laughed, and that had been that. He was not an easy man. She had figured that out quickly. He was controlled and precise, and had silences that lasted long enough to make people uncomfortable, though Greer had discovered, somewhere around the third time they had dinner, that if she just waited him out, something real always came eventually. He wasn't cold. He was careful. There was a difference. And she was still adjusting to this, very powerful in ways she hadn't understood at first, and still didn't fully see the edges of. She knew he ran something, a network of companies, legal and otherwise. She knew that men who looked like bodyguards stood outside restaurants when they ate, and that he had made a phone call once that had resulted in a problem she'd been having with a distributor disappearing entirely, and that he had never once explained any of this to her in terms she could verify. She also knew that he had sat on her kitchen floor with Lena for 40 minutes one Saturday afternoon, building a complicated Lego castle, completely serious about the engineering of it, while Greer watched from the doorway and felt something in her chest she didn't have a word for yet. "Just tell me one thing," Dana said. "Are you happy?" Greer thought about it. "Yes," she said. "In a way that scares me a little. That's the good kind of happy," Dana said. "That's the kind worth keeping." She hadn't told Stellan about Brett. It hadn't seemed necessary. Brett was over. Brett was a chapter she'd closed and shelved and stopped thinking about in any emotional way. But that evening, when Stellan came by the shop after close, he did this sometimes, appeared without announcement, which she'd told him 3 separate times she found infuriating, and which he continued to do anyway. She found herself telling him anyway. He listened the way he always listened, completely still, eyes on her face. He said, "Bless her heart," she finished, in front of his girlfriend, "about me, in my own shop." "What's his last name?" Stellan said. "That is not a question I'm going to answer. Greer. Stellan." She mimicked his flat tone, and he looked at her for a moment, and then something shifted in his expression, barely visible, like a door opening an inch. She'd come to understand that was his version of a smile. "It's fine," she said. "I'm fine. I don't need you to do anything. I know you don't need me to." He said it without heat. Statement of fact. "That's not what I asked." She started wiping down the counter. He sat on a bar stool and watched her and didn't push. That was one of the things about him she'd never expected. He didn't push. He waited. He had extraordinary patience for a man who, she suspected, usually got exactly what he wanted. "His name is Brett," she said finally. "Brett Callahan. Formerly my last name, which I took back the day the divorce was finalized." Stellan nodded. He took out his phone and set it on the counter, face down. He didn't look at it. He looked at her. "He has no idea who I am," he said. "Not a question. Why would he and the girlfriend? She pitied you. Standard." Greer set down the cloth. "I'm the cautionary tale in their version of the story. The first wife who couldn't keep her husband interested, who retreated into a small business and single motherhood. They feel sorry for me, and it makes them feel better about themselves." "And how does it make you feel?" She thought about it. Really thought, the way she'd learned to when he asked a question that deserved an honest answer. "Tired," she said finally. "Not sad, not angry. Just tired of being an anecdote in someone else's narrative." He reached across the counter. He didn't do this often. He was not, by nature, a demonstrative person in public or in private, or he hadn't been until recently. She'd noticed something shifting, and he turned her hand over and held it, palm up, like he was reading something there. "You're not an anecdote," he said. It was a simple thing. It didn't fix anything, but she felt it land somewhere beneath the tired, in the part of herself she'd been protecting so carefully for so long, and she had to look away for a moment and blink. "Lena's at my mom's tonight," she said eventually. "I know," he said. "You told me Monday." "I did?" "You said," and I'm paraphrasing, "Monday night I get to be a person instead of a parent, which means I'm going to eat cereal over the sink and watch something on television that's not animated." She laughed. She hadn't meant to. It surprised her, like it did sometimes, the way he caught things she said and kept them. "That was the plan, yes." "Come to dinner," he said. "Stellan, not Rosewood. Somewhere quiet. I want to talk to you about something." The way he said it was different. She noticed the difference. She'd become something of a student of him, of the particular weight he gave to words, of the moments when precision meant more than volume, and this was a heavier sentence than it looked. "Okay," she said. The restaurant he chose was a place she'd never been, small, Italian, on a block she'd driven past 100 times without registering it. The kind of place that looked closed from the outside and opened into candlelight, and the smell of good bread and a maitre d', who clearly knew Stellan and did not make a production of it. They ate. They talked about Lena, about the expansion Greer was considering for the shop, about a book he'd recommended her 3 weeks ago that she'd finally read and had opinions about. It was domestic, almost. Easy in a way she still caught herself being suspicious of, because nothing good had ever come this easily before. He waited until they were on the last of the wine before he said it. "I should have told you this earlier. I've been trying to find the right moment, and I've decided there isn't one, so." She set down her glass. "I don't run companies," he said. "I mean, I do, but that's not the primary thing." He looked at her. "You've been careful not to ask about certain things." "I've noticed certain things," she said carefully, "and decided they were yours to share when you wanted." "I know." Something in his face shifted. "That's why I want to share it," he told her then, methodically. He didn't dress it up or minimize it. His family's history, going back 3 generations. The way that history had translated into the present, into what he controlled, what he was responsible for, what he protected, and what he required others to protect in turn. He told her about the men outside restaurants and why. He told her about the phone call with her distributor and what had actually been said. He told her things that should have alarmed her and did a little in the way that all real things are a little alarming when they take full shape. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "How many people know?" she said. "People who work for me, my family, a few others." A pause. "And now you. Why me? Because I want to continue this." He said it simply. "No performance. And I can't do that honestly without you knowing." She looked at him. This contained, careful, complicated man who had sat on her kitchen floor and built a Lego castle with her daughter and always remembered the things she said and had never once in 3 months made her feel like a chapter or a phase or a cautionary tale. "Okay," she said. He blinked, the first genuine surprise she'd seen on his face in weeks. "Okay, I'm not saying okay to the whole thing at once. I'm saying okay to what you just said, that you want to continue this. I want to continue it too." She picked up her wine. "We can talk about the rest. Over time." "You're not?" He stopped. Started again. "Most people's first response is fear. I'm aware that might be the intelligent response," she said. "I'm choosing not to be most people." The corner of his mouth moved, that almost smile. "You never are," he said. She didn't think about Brett for the rest of that week. She thought about Lena and the shop and what Stellan had told her, which she was sitting with quietly, processing the way she processed most things, in small pieces, over time while she worked. She thought about fear and whether what she felt was closer to that or to something else. Then Brett posted a photo. She didn't follow him. Dana sent it to her with a screenshot. A photo of Brett and Kendall at some kind of charity event. Brett looking polished and successful. Kendall in a dress that cost what Greer made in a week in the early days of the shop. And the caption, not Brett's caption, someone else's, tagged, "Charleston's power couple, making moves." Below it, someone else had commented, "Whatever happened to the first wife? Wasn't she running a little coffee place?" And Brett had liked the comment. She looked at the screenshot for a long time. Then she put her phone face down on the counter, finished the morning prep, texted Dana a single emoji, and went on with her day. That evening, Stellan came by again. He took one look at her and said, "What happened?" She showed him the screenshot. She wasn't sure why. She'd spent the day deciding it didn't matter, and it didn't, not really. But she handed him her phone. He looked at it. His face did nothing. That was, she had learned, when he was most focused. "He liked the comment," Stellan said. He did. The comment describing you as someone's first wife who runs a little coffee place. That would be the one. He handed the phone back. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's an event Saturday. I'd like you to come." "What kind of event?" "The Hospital Foundation. Their annual dinner. It's visible. Press will be there. People who know me will be there." She looked at him. "Are you asking me to come as your date to a public event because of a screenshot my ex-husband liked on Instagram? I'm asking you to come because I want you there." A pause. The timing is unrelated. She didn't fully believe that. She also didn't fully mind. "Okay," she said. "I'll have someone bring you options. For the dress, you will absolutely not. Greer." He said her name with infinite patience. "Let me do this." She wore dark green. Dana came over and sat on the edge of the bed and watched her get ready and said, "You look devastating." And Greer said, "That's the goal." And Dana said, "Is he going to look good?" And Greer said, "He always looks good. It's deeply inconvenient." And Dana laughed and hugged her from behind, carefully, so as not to ruin anything. And Greer felt something warm and certain in her chest. The event was at the Harmon House, one of those Charleston venues that had been a private home once and still felt like it. High ceilings, dark wood, the kind of candlelight that made everyone look like they were the best version of themselves. Greer stood with Stellan in the receiving line and shook hands with people whose names she recognized from buildings and foundations and the financial pages. And she smiled and was warm and precise and thought, "I used to do this as a nurse practitioner at hospital galas. The only person in the room who'd arrived by transit and left early because of a shift. Now I'm here differently, and I'm still me." That was the thing she kept returning to. She was still herself. Stellan introduced her without qualification. Not "This is Greer, my friend," or "This is Greer. We're, seeing each other," but simply with one hand at the small of her back, "This is Greer. Full stop." As if the rest would be self-evident. She saw Brett across the room before Brett saw her. He was there with Kendall and two other couples, all bright teeth and suit jackets, clustered near the bar. He was laughing at something and he looked fine. Happy. Successful and happy, which was, she realized, exactly what she wanted for him, in the bloodless way you want good things for people you no longer have strong feelings about. Then he saw her. She watched the moment of recognition cross his face. Then a second thing crossed it, a recalibration, the visible process of updating information as he registered who she was standing with and how she was standing, and the fact that Stellan had not released his hand from the small of her back. Brett looked at Stellan. Stellan looked back. He did this with an absolute absence of aggression or performance. Just looked. The way a mountain looks at weather. Greer watched Brett's jaw tighten and relax and tighten again, and she thought, "This is not what I came for, but I will not lie and say I don't feel it." Later, during dinner, she heard two men at the table behind them discussing the foundation's major donors. One of them mentioned Stellan's name in a way that made her realize, again, the scale of what she'd said okay to. She sat with that quietly, eating very good salmon and listening to Stellan respond to her question about the children's wing expansion. And she thought about the kind of love that doesn't diminish you, the kind where both people are whole, where one person's size doesn't make the other smaller. She thought she might be finding that. At the end of the evening, as they waited for the car, she heard footsteps behind them. She knew before she turned. "Greer," Brett said. His voice was doing a thing it used to do, that careful register of ease over something that wasn't quite ease. "Didn't realize you'd be here. Small city," she said pleasantly. His eyes moved to Stellan, who had not turned around yet. Then Stellan turned, and Brett, she watched it happen, had the instinct of a man who understood power dynamics and was, for the first time in their acquaintance, encountering something larger than himself in the room. "Brett Callahan," Brett said, extending his hand. Reflex. The practiced introduction. Stellan shook his hand. "I know," he said. That was all. Brett blinked. We go back a ways, he said, nodding at Greer. We were married before. He laughed. Nervous laugh. Small world. Yes, Stellan said. The car arrived. Stellan placed his hand at Greer's back. Greer. She looked at Brett one last time. He was standing slightly too still, the way people stand when they're trying to look like they're not standing still, holding his champagne glass and wearing a smile she recognized as the one he used when he'd lost something and couldn't say so. It was good to see you, she said, and meant it. She got in the car. They didn't talk about it on the way home. Stellan had a call he needed to take, quiet, in a language she was starting to think was Italian, probably relevant to the parts of his life she was still learning the edges of. And she looked out the window at the lit streets and thought about nothing in particular. When they got to her house, she checked in with her mother. Lena was asleep, had eaten all her dinner, had asked 3 times when Mama was coming home, and she stood in her kitchen and took her heels off and felt the floor under her bare feet. Stellan came in and stood in the doorway. He'd loosened his tie. He did that, she'd noticed, as soon as he was somewhere he trusted. You should know, she said without turning around, that I did not go tonight to make a point to Brett. I know, he said. I went because you asked me, I know, and because I wanted to. She turned around. I want to be clear that I'm doing this for me, not because of him, not to prove anything. He crossed the kitchen in a few steps and stood in front of her and looked at her face for a long moment, that complete attention he gave to things he actually cared about. I know, he said for the 3rd time. And then, quietly, I love that about you. She went still. He didn't look away. He was not a man who said things for effect, and she knew that by now, knew it the way she knew the weight of her own name, the sound of her daughter laughing, the smell of good coffee just after a shot pulls right. I wasn't planning to say that yet, he said, but I've been thinking it for a while, and tonight, he stopped, started again. You were yourself, the whole evening. You didn't adjust yourself to fit the room. I never have, she said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. I know. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair off her face with a careful hand. That's why. She stood in her bare feet in her own kitchen that she had built herself, in the life she had made from the parts she'd salvaged after everything fell apart, and she thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. This, right here, where someone sees all of you. The shop, the daughter, the tired, the complicated, the history you haven't finished processing, and doesn't step back. I love you too, she said. I've been thinking it for a while also. The corner of his mouth moved. That almost smile. And then, slowly, like he was making a decision, it became an actual smile, full and real, and she thought she'd remember that moment for the rest of her life. Stellan Voss smiling in her kitchen, tie loose, the city quiet outside, her daughter asleep at her mother's house. The shop waiting for her tomorrow morning like it always was. She stepped forward, and he held her, and she let him, which was its own kind of strength, knowing when to lean and when to stand, knowing that one didn't cancel out the other. Outside, the city went on being itself, and inside this kitchen, something that had been patient and careful and built slowly from honest materials became finally certain. She didn't need Brett to see it. She didn't need anyone to see it. She knew what she had.